Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show. I'm Matt Preem. It's a recap of National Signing Day, a show where Dan Lanning held a press conference pretty late into the evening. We wanted to wait until we did a show until he spoke. And then we just decided, let's just do it the day after, give us some time to kind of digest the class because it's the best class in school history for the second straight year. I think it's the best class in school history for like the third time in 4 or 5 years. So the program is starting to stack talent as well as it's ever done. And it's the number 4 class in the country. 4 5-star players. And I think maybe the word of the day or the evening for Lanning guys seemed to be, and it's true, of quality over quantity. They only took 20 guys in the class, but every single one of them feels like a pretty significant addition. Just one 3-star recruit that's a scholarship guy in the composite. Rocco Graziano was not announced, which tells us he's a preferred walk-on. So we'll deal with that later. But another class where just they completely loaded up on some of the best players across the country.
I mean, this is just revalidating what we already knew, which is that Oregon's a recruiting powerhouse, and it comes on the heels of a perfect regular season. I think the things that stood out to me probably most about yesterday was there was word that maybe Dallas Wilson was going to end up at Florida kind of early in that morning, late Wednesday evening. They held on to him. That's a 5-star receiver that could have gone anywhere in the country. He's from Florida. They were able to hold on to him. Brandon Finney, we talked about it leading into this. I don't know if it was ever quite as nerve-wracking towards the end, but for a moment that was like Penn State was going to be able to, where he goes to high school is a Penn State feeder school, essentially. It looked like for a second there, he was going to end up there. That's a 5-star. So they retained 2 5-stars. We're looking at kind of almost in-state or the kind of local school. And in both cases, they held on to him. And then the big part on, Wednesday as well was, how about flipping some big time prospects? I think Neem Offord's flip was probably the biggest story nationally almost of the day in terms of a 5-star kid from Birmingham, Alabama, not going to Ohio State and going to Oregon. And then Jaren Kiave Sangaputele. I think that's pretty decent on the pronunciation. We're going to have to workshop that one throughout the next couple of years because this guy is legit. And to flip him from Cal, a big time quarterback prospect with a really live arm, I think that's huge. So they retained the guys and they added a couple of guys. I thought that was just a really impressive close to the class.
Yeah, 100%. I'd echo everything that you just said there, Eric, about flipping those guys. Oregon loaded up on positions of need. They're going to have a lot of potential guys leaving the team due to the NFL, due to just graduation next year at cornerback and at wide receiver. And all they did was grab 2 of the best 3 wide receivers in the country and 2 of the best 5 cornerbacks in the country in this 2025 recruiting class. So not bad. It's a good way to kind of reload and retool. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly a deep class, but not as big as classes that Dan has taken in the last couple of seasons, which I think is by design. The transfer portal opens Monday. I don't know if Oregon's going to get a guy like immediately on Monday, but I'm certain we'll see some action and see Oregon's name pop up with a couple players. And for Oregon for next year, you just got to look to reload, and that's exactly what they did in this class. Really like what they did on the outside, obviously with the wide receivers and the cornerbacks, but I think it was important to grab another linebacker in Gavin Nix. You brought in 3 guys last season. There's certainly going to be some people who are leaving. Obviously Bryce and Jeff Boss are gone, but you just need more competition there. And that was another thing that Dan talked about a lot in his press conferences, wanting to bring in the best in the country and have them all compete. He wants guys who aren't afraid of competition. He doesn't want to see players say in high school go, well, I have the best chance of starting here, or I have the best time getting on the field here, so I'm going to go to this lesser school. No, he wants guys who are going to be uber competitive, guys who are going to come to campus and say, all right, I'm the new guy on campus, sure, but I think I'm better than that dude. I think I'm better than that dude, and I'm going to go prove it. And I think these got that, and good, luckily for them, and a lot of really talented players who are going to come to campus and think to themselves that they're better than that guy, and they just might be. It's going to be a completely different team next year, and that's a podcast way down the line. But this is a good start in terms of retooling it.
couple thoughts on things you guys said. Eric's point of offered flipping him. I mean, I think that the reason why it was so big was the flip in general for Naeem Offord wasn't going to be a surprise, but it was going to be for the local school, Auburn. And I don't know the last time Oregon has kind of gone into like an SEC school area and basically taken that state's best player away from an SEC school that really wanted him. Like that just doesn't really happen all that often. So not only did they flip him, but they weren't even supposed to be the school, going into signing day that was going to flip him. And then Jared brought up a point of like, yeah, it's a low class probably for the portal. I agree. I went back and looked at it, excluding Dan Lanning's first year when he was hired, replacing Mario Cristobal, the 2022 class, when you kind of have to scramble as a head coach to kind of figure things out in terms of who you're going after. I think those classes, you either are knock it out of the park, you just kind of call it a wash because how late you get added into the process there. But from a numbers perspective, this is the lowest number of guys signed in a class since 2016. Mark Helfrich's final recruiting class that he signed. And I think it goes back to Dan's point of quality over quantity. They signed the lowest number of guys, and yet they signed the best recruiting class. Because typically, to get into the top 5, top 4, number 1, ranking perspective race here, you kind of have to inflate the numbers a little bit. You kind of have to load up on 26, 27, 28, 29 guys, and Oregon did not do that. And with 20 guys, that tells you a per player basis. They're number 1 in the country already from a per player ranking perspective. They only have one 3-star guy that's committed to this class, and it's Toby Hastrup. We'll probably get to him down the road, but he's the perfect example of if you're going to take a flyer on a guy, that's the type of player that you do it with. I'm really impressed with the depth of this group. Obviously, the talent of this group. 12 different states have signed onto this class, and I think that's kind of the tip of the spear for Oregon, where they talked about going to the Big Ten, expanding their reach, building out their brand even more. They're all over the country. They signed as many guys in Florida and Texas this year, or more than Oregon or Arizona or Hawaii or Nevada or Washington. Like, you got to combine all those states to equal what they did in Texas and Florida. It's a remarkable class. It's a good class. It sets them up to be in a good position. But nonetheless, like we saw last night with Shaq McCoy transferring out, some of these guys won't make it. Don't want to be a downer here, but like some of these guys won't make it, and that's why you see it. You have to see it on the field before you just instantly say, "Oh, like they're all going to be superstars." But nonetheless, I guess naturally, it's just segue right into the next part where we think a guy that's going to play right away as a true freshman, offensively and defensively. Eric, why don't you go first here?
Well, kind of following up on your Naeem Offord point, which is a really good one. They also did that this year with DeCorian Moore, who's my pick in terms of going into, because now they're the SEC. So they went into Texas. They got a guy that Texas really wanted, that was committed to LSU, that all these schools down there wanted, and they held on to him. And I think DeCorian, it's very unusual under Dan Lanning for a true freshman to play really much of any role. Yep. If you look at the history of it. This year, the answer has basically been Peyton Woodyard and Roger Saliapaga are the only 2 players who are not redshirting this year, and those are special teams guys. Those are guys that played a lot on special teams in coverage. Or
Jay Harris. Don't forget
Jay Harris, but he's not a true freshman. So,
special team. Yeah.
But
I'm just saying, too.
Yeah, but they just don't play true freshmen very much. And you go back to the year before that, they played Poncho, they played Mateo and Tatum, but that was basically it. And you go back to the year before that, and it's same kind of a story. So it's hard to crack into this kind of the rotation early. And I think there's a couple guys this year that really think they're going to have a chance to play. And Moore is one that is in that group, and I buy into it. This is a 5-star kid that is the number 1 receiver in the country, that has incredible physical traits. He's not your 6'3", 6'4" physical Adonis, but at 5'11", he's about as well built, as dynamic, as sudden as you're going to see. Go watch some of the high school tape. Go watch him on 7-on-7. His 7-on-7 stuff is just terrifying, frankly. And Oregon's going to have opportunity. Yeah, in a good way, obviously. But obviously there's going to be opportunity at receiver, right? You think about, I mean, it's possible. We don't know what Evan Stewart will do. It's possible they're replacing all three starters. And I think it's imperative that between Moore and Wilson, one of these guys is at least in the rotation and a part of it early. And I think it'll be Moore. I think this is the rare breed, and we see it at receiver, I think, more than other positions nationally. Look around the country this year. There are 2 or 3 of the better receivers in the country are true freshmen. Ryan Williams at Bama, Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. There are dynamic athletes that early on can kind of play early and be key parts of offenses, and I think DeCorian Moore could be that for Oregon. So that's kind of the easy pick for me. I think his tape is as good as it gets for the receiver position for an Oregon signee in particular, and there's a reason that I think he's second only to Kayvon Thibodeau in terms of the school's all-time signing lists. And Kayvon was a guy who took a little bit of time to kind of break into the rotation, but as you remember, like statistically, I think his best season was his freshman season. So I think this is the rare breed of guy who could come in and really be an impact player day one.
100% agree. Again, going out, we're both going to go very much out on a limb and pick 2 5-star kids. I like Brandon Finney. I know that Oregon flipped Naeem Offord on signing day over Ohio State and over Auburn. There is something about Brandon Finney's film that I liked more. 6'2", 185, 190 pounds, cornerback out of Maryland. I just think that his tenacity and his role as a cornerback kind of fits what Oregon has done the last couple of seasons under Dan and under Tosh as defensive coordinator with Chris Hampton. He's just very reminiscent of how like Oregon has wanted their cornerbacks to play. They picked up the physicality. They picked up size. Even though their starting quarterbacks right now are not the tallest. I think Nico Reed is taller than Jabbar Muhammad, but they're both like 5'10" or 5'11". Not the biggest guys in the world. But the last couple of recruiting classes, this is what Oregon's been doing. They're picking up cornerbacks who are all like 6 feet tall. Dalen Oster was a cornerback. Now he's played slot. He's 6'2" guys last year. Ify Obadegwu and Dakota Fields were both over 6 feet tall. Like this is what Oregon has been doing, and this is what Brandon Finney is, and this is what Naeem Offord is. But when I watched Brandon Finney's tape, there's just something that kind of clicked. And not to say that Naeem Offord is bad or anything like that, because he's going to be, he could be a special player down the line too, and he certainly was an option here for me. But whatever it is about Brandon Finney, his physicality, his size, his speed, his length, his progress through the high school charts where he's just kind of shot up like a cannon through it all. I really like his film, and I like his way of playing cornerback. And similar to DeCorian Moore and Eric's pick, there's going to be an opening there. There are plenty of kids who have been on campus for longer and will be on campus longer than Finney. But it's still an open game. You have like the guys like Roderick Pleasance and Fields coming back from an injury, and Ify Obadegwu, who hasn't played at all this season. Like there are a bunch of question marks at the quarterback spot for next year's Oregon team. And either Offord or Finney are going to have a chance to go in there and compete for a starting job. I'm sure Oregon might look to the transfer portal, try to pick up a guy if the right one presents itself and they enter the transfer portal. But you're bringing in 3 cornerbacks who are top 60 players in the country. Like you're not telling them like, sorry guys, we're going to go get a transfer kid. You're not going to play. Like this is going to be an open competition. And at least on paper right now, until Oregon picks up the best quarterback in the country in the transfer portal, but it's going to be an open competition. And I don't know. I have really liked Brandon Finney's tape. I don't think that he's necessarily better than Naeem Offord. This is more of like my intrusive thoughts are to pick Brandon Finney in this instance. And I think he could be a guy who could play a lot right away. I don't know if he'll start or anything like that, but I think that he's just a really talented cornerback. It could be a guy who sees the field early.
Well, I had 2 guys, and it's going to depend on who you pick, so you just didn't double up. But Finney was going to be one of them. So I'm with you, Jared. Like, I think he plays even with Offord playing probably as well. So my other pick is going to be Dallas Wilson. And maybe that's like the wild card here, but Trayshawn Holden's gone, and I fully expect Oregon to go into the transfer portal and add a guy. But the reality is, I think we're going to anticipate some departures from the underclassmen. And it could be one, it could be two or more from the receiver group. But you look at kind of the makeup that Dallas Wilson has, and he's got some traits that are to an extent similar to what Trayshawn Holden is. He's big frame, big catch radius. His gait's pretty big. He's an athletic guy once he gets in the open space. And with Kyler Casper being out for the year, Jurion Dickey not really having a role this season, they don't have a taller, more physical receiver on their roster for next season. Everybody else is like 6 foot or 6'1" or shorter. Justice Lowe is 6'1". They signed a bunch of guys last year, and Dylan Gresham and Ryan Pelham and Jeremiah McClellan and Jack Ressler, but they're all like the 6 foot, 5'11", type guys. And I think there's a unique path for Dallas to show up and potentially find his way on the field right away. And it's a position that, historically, maybe not under Dan, but historically a receiver can get on the field quickly if things pick up. I think Takorian Moore is going to play a ton. But I think the path is open for Dallas, at least currently right now before the portal, for him to also see some playing time. I don't know if he's going to start. I wouldn't expect him to start, but it's possible he's going to play.
By the way, it speaks to this class where we all got to pick a 5-star for this.
100%.
We should note that there were 4 5-stars in this class. I think that's a program high as well.
And I guess segueing into just kind of the under the radar part, and to that same point, Eric, like we all, I guess, could go with Toby the one and only 3-star.
We've got we're gonna have to pick a 4-star here. I think
we're gonna have to pick a 4-star guy to be an under the radar player. And I guess I'll go first here. And Zach, maybe it's just because it's a local kid, but Zach Sikowski at a Central Catholic, offensive tackle. I talked to his high school coach, and he said that like as a sophomore he was on the varsity team, and he was just this big lanky kid that kind of was just finding himself from his athleticism standpoint. And then as a junior, he kind of grew into his body a little bit, and it was all about realizing how nasty of an offensive lineman you could be. And then this season, he called him like a killer, just a guy that just dominated double teams or could do whatever he wanted against, guys. And Dan Lanning echoed the same thing of just a guy that every year got better. And then Brandon Huffman, when we had him on last week to kind of preview the show, and we asked him about Zach, that was the same thing. A 6'6", 270-pound guy that, quite frankly, could probably load up the weight and be totally fine. I think he won't play as a true freshman. I don't think he will really play a ton as a redshirt freshman at Oregon. But as that third-year guy, he's got the ability to play right or left tackle. He could play even guard if they really wanted him to. He's athletic enough. He's big enough. His hands are strong enough. I think he's going to be a guy that down the road will turn into something. State of Oregon's #1 player, and traditionally, Alik Terry has said it multiple times when we've had him on here or in interview sessions, like he loves Pacific Northwest offensive linemen, and he raved about the group that they brought in last year. I imagine when we speak to him at either bowl eligibility or bowl availability or spring ball, like he's going to say the same thing about Zach of the potential he has. So I'm going to go with the in-state kid, Zach Sikowski.
He was going to be my pick. I love this kid, and I think again it speaks to the fact that we could pick an under the radar who's a top 200 player in the country. Yeah. I mean that's how good this class is, and I echo a lot of what you just said there. I'll pick another player to talk about just so it's not overly redundant, but I think there's a chance this is like one of the next great offensive linemen at Oregon. I really do. He has all the physical traits. He's zooming up the boards. I almost think you talk to some people, he's almost a little underrated even at where he's at, because I think it was kind of like, do we really want to just zoom this guy all the way up to the top 100, top 150? So I think that's a great pick. I will pick the layup again. I guess I took Takorian Moore, the highest rated guy, and I'm going to take Toby Hostrup, the lowest rated guy. But it's such a great story. This is a guy who didn't play varsity football until this year. Really, I don't think played football at all. He played European football, soccer growing up. This guy's from London. So, and by the way, I was disappointed. I went and watched an interview. It doesn't have an accent. The accent's gone.
Really?
He just sounds like a guy from the Southeast now, which is kind of a bummer. He played his high school football in Texas, and I think he had like 4 sacks in his first game, and 3 games into basically his varsity career, he had offers from like all of the SEC and Oregon and all sorts of schools. So incredibly athletic, ran sub 11 in the 100 meters as a 6'4", 230-pound athlete. I'm curious to see, because you look at him, he is yoked up. Dan even kind of mentioned he's obsessed with working out. Like, I wonder what the actual, like, how much weight can he gain on that frame? Because he's I wouldn't say he's like a broadly built guy, and it's possible this is a, ceiling is 6'4", 245, elite pass rusher, never somebody who's great on rundowns, but that's a valuable asset. You see that even at Oregon. Like, I'm not saying he's going to have the same trajectory, but like Jaden Moore is a guy who's probably built a little similarly. He's now become a pretty viable, third down pass rush option off the edge. I could see Haastrup becoming that in a couple of years, but this is just such a unique player with such a unique story that I think it's worth talking about. And frankly, somebody who has the athletic intangibles. I know he's the lowest rated guy on the board, but he has athletic intangibles if everything comes together to be like an NFL player. But it's hard to make that projection, I think, based upon 1 year of high school. And again, a frame where I'm kind of curious on, sort of similar to Nasir Wyatt, the other outside linebacker who I love as well. I'm curious on both those guys, just how much weight they can put on, because they're both, I think, pretty close to being maybe 10, 15 pounds from kind of their maximum.
Yeah, I think Sikowski and Haastrup are the two like easiest picks in terms of like under the radar guys. Sikowski just because he's a Pacific Northwest kid, and that's just kind of what happens with high school players out here. And then Haastrup, for very obvious reasons, only playing football for the last 8 months or something like that. I think De'Aaron Hill is going to be a dude. Dan was pretty glowing about him last night during the press conference. Like when the 2025 original rankings came out, or not the original ones, but some of the very first ones, he was like a top 60, top 70 kid in the country. He's fallen since then. I think he's 221 in the top 247. So still a 4-star, but towards the bottom of that, 247 threshold that, fun fact, 24/7 has. But I still think that he's a dude. I think he's great with the ball in his hands. I think he can get by people. I think he can run through people. Listed at 5'11", 180 pounds. He's twitchy. He's quick. He can get to the edge. He can get outside and get around. Athletic linebackers, athletic defensive backs. They had talked about how he could, potentially be used in special teams, and I think that could certainly be a role. I don't know if he's, like an every down type of running back. He could be best suited as a third down running back. Something that Oregon really hasn't had the last couple of seasons under Dan Lanning. So I think that could be like a potential interesting wrinkle to the fray in terms of this offensive set. Because usually it's just Jordan James or Noah Whittington or Bucky Irving, who are not like what we would consider third down backs, guys who just go out and catch the ball on 3rd and 8 and can make a couple guys miss. But I think that's what De'Aaron Hill could be. I think he'll just be underrated in the terms of he won't necessarily be the 1,000-yard rusher. I think Jordan Davison is a guy who could potentially become that, given his size and strength and being like a real first, second down running back. But I think this guy could be potentially invaluable to this team, where he's your everyday punt and kick returner. He's a guy who can get a couple scores. He's a guy who's going to make a play every game. Kind of like, I don't know, like a Tony Brooks James type of fella on this offense that really doesn't rely too heavily on running backs who are built like that. But I just think that he's going to make an impact. I don't think it'll be in his first year, maybe not even his second year, but if he sticks with the program, I think he can just make an impact, just his size and speed and ability to make people miss.
Jared, by the way, sorry, Matt, but did you guys see how many touchdowns he scored in his state championship game?
Like 7.
10.
Yeah. That's normal.
For like 380 yards. And I went and watched the highlights.
Did you watch the competition, though? It wasn't very good.
it was against like a school of 135 players, students at in
So
rural
impressive.
Illinois. But co-sign that, Jared. Love this kid. Think he's got a lot of upside, a lot of juice.
I was gonna actually want to bring him up if none of us did as a second go around. There's another guy that I did want to mention, and kind of along the lines of Jared's thought process. Like it probably won't happen year 1 or year 2, but Cooper Perry, a receiver out of Arizona. I thought Dan kind of really glowingly spoke about him when you go back and watch the video. A guy that has over 3,100 yards receiving and 51 touchdowns in his career of 3 years in Arizona. Also had like 550 something yards rushing and 7 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a guy that any other year we're talking about maybe the headliner at the position or the clear number 2 receiver at the position from a recruiting perspective. And he's probably going to be an afterthought just because they signed 2 5-star receivers that are unbelievably good. And I just think Cooper Perry could also find his way onto the field in 2 or 3 years if he's willing to go through the grind of development and stick it out, which sometimes doesn't happen with guys. After a year or 2, they leave. But if he sticks through it and develops, I think he could be another one that could find his way on the field as like a redshirt sophomore. Kind of very similar to Justice Lowe.
Can I have one more? Or are we just going to go? We'll just go a second go around. I love Dimitri Manning as well.
That's a good one.
6'6", like 350 or 345. I can't remember exactly what he's listed at. Elevated to a 4-star in the most recent update, and we talked to Brandon about him, and he raved about him. And you just go watch the tape. This guy is
345 on the official release from Oregon.
That works. Just a really huge body, and I think ultimately a guard, but just another name to throw out there that's not in your top 5 or 6 players.
He's Stephen Jones 2.0. I mean,
I like that. Yeah.
Like I saw him in camp, and he very much like Stephen Jones did. He blocks out the sun because he's absolutely ginormous.
Mm-hmm. My other guy is Vander Plug.
There you go.
This could go for underrated and a guy who could play his freshman year. Just because Oregon's losing their tight ends. They're losing Patrick Herbert and they're losing Terrence Ferguson. And they have Roger Chaliapaga and Kenyon Sadiq as returners. AJ Pugliano, couldn't remember his name there for a second. It's not great. This is a position that Oregon needs to go after in the transfer portal. But Plug is a solid player. 6'6" too. He's built bigger than like Roger Chaliapaga is. He's versatile in his position. He can play outside. He can inline block. He can do what you want a tight end to do. It's a very difficult position to learn as a freshman because you have to learn how to block and how to run routes. But this is a position where he could see the field early, just kind of like how Roger Chaliapaga did when Terrence Ferguson went down, because Oregon has not built up a lot of depth here, and that's one of the problems sometimes. But I think he's a good player too, and that's the other side of it. Again, another a California kid on this list. I think he late flip from Washington during the regular season. I think he's just a solid player, and I think there's a chance that like a lot of guys in this list could get some playing time early, but this is definitely more of like a positional need for Oregon that they need to address here, and they did with Plug, and they need to address forward.
All right. Portal or high school additions in February, I think it's more going to be almost a portal look because there's not a ton of talent left. I guess Andrew Olesh, a 4-star tight end, to Jared's point, he might get added into the mix. There's a McKay Madsen, a linebacker, but he's going to take a religious mission, whether he signs with Oregon or signs with someone else in February. There's another offensive lineman out of Bishop Gorman that
Alai Kalanivalu.
Yes, was committed to Oregon and then flipped to BYU, but Blair Anglo of 24/7 Sports reported that Oregon made a run. He didn't sign yesterday. We'll see maybe that he flips to Oregon again, but probably more so portal. And I'm going to save a position for our friend Jared here. I think that's where he's going to go. So I'm going to go somewhere else, but we could say every position because they're probably going to try and target at least someone there. But I think there's some positions that they need multiple guys, or they need to go after and find a home run, 5-star portal edition, air quote, 5-star instant impact type guy. And then there's going to be other positions where it's like, hey, find a veteran guy that, if he wins the job, great, but it's also not going to scare off other guys, from a depth perspective. But I think at running back, this is going to be a position where they're probably going to hit the portal. And I think depending upon what Jordan James does with the NFL after this offseason, we should note he's currently doing a football camp in the middle of June in Eugene, and calling himself an Oregon Duck. Maybe that's a sign that he's staying. We don't know. But I think the NFL will be a real possibility for him. But regardless, I think it would be in Oregon's best interest on Monday and throughout the rest of the month to try and find another running back. I know they signed 2, but Whittington has said this is his last year at Oregon. And Jaden Lamar has been solid, but I thought it was also interesting that, when the game got out of hand against UW, he did not play at the position. It was Dwan Riggs or Dinks who got the run. But regardless, I don't think you want to go into a scenario where if Whittington and James are both gone, Dwan Riggs or Jaden Lamar or Jay Harris are your top backs. I don't know if that's what you want. Yeah. So I'm going to go running back in the portal, and it's probably going to be can you find as good of a player as you possibly can?
By the way, on Dink, I'm curious because James tried to ask a question about like true freshmen playing in postseason play, and of course Dan shot that down. Right. I wonder if using Riggs the way they did in the fourth quarter against Washington was kind of an audition to say, hey, could you be the number 3 guy in postseason play over Jaden? Totally speculating. Don't know. But I think this kid looks really dynamic with the ball in his hands, and I like what I saw there. So it doesn't
everyone compares him to Bucky.
I know he's got the Bucky comparisons. I don't want to overstep and say he's going to be your number 1 running back next year. I think that would be incredibly problematic for a lot of reasons, but I do wonder if like he gets some run here in postseason play and then he ends up being in the rotation full season in 2025. I think offensive tackle pretty clearly is a huge need here. And if we're talking portal, because from the prep ranks, you just don't bring in an offensive tackle and expect them to start or play a huge role. Josh Conley was like the number 1 rated offensive lineman in the country. And we remember he came in and he was used a little bit in their 13J packages where they went big, but he was not a starter his first year, and I don't think you expect any of the true freshmen that they've got signed now, or any of the true freshmen that they could theoretically add, later on to be contributors right away. But through the portal, they absolutely need to find offensive tackles. We know Johnny is gone; he's out of eligibility. I think Josh, like Jordan James, is somebody who, prior to the season, and kind of even early on in the season, we were just kind of writing off as, oh yeah, he's going to end up in the NFL next year. He'll be a 3 and done. I think we're going to be pretty aggressive in trying to retain him. Maybe he ends up hanging out and playing a 4th season here as left tackle. I think that's possible. Not reporting it's definitely happening or anything like that, but I think that's possible. And even if that's the case, I think we'd all agree they need to find a right tackle. And if Josh is gone, they certainly need to find a left tackle, because you look around the roster and you go, because of injury this year, they were forced to kind of play some of these younger offensive guards like a Dave Iuli, a Kavika Rogers. There hasn't been really any tackles that have jumped off the page in terms of the younger guys yet. And maybe there's players developing like a Trent Ferguson, excuse me. I thought maybe Shaq McRoy would be a name to know. Clearly he's not going to be. And so I think that offensive tackle position, whether it's right or left, are going to be really important needs in the portal this year. And frankly, I would be curious to see who they're able to get, because I would imagine in terms of allocating portal NIL budget, this would be a position where you're going to have to pay up. And I think it's a position that they're going to be willing to pay up if the right player's there.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, dude. How does Bedford factor into, I know he was a guard showing up, but he has experience playing tackle at Indiana.
Yeah. He hasn't played tackle in like 2 years now.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and I think his original ACL injury 3 years ago is what moved him into guard, frankly. So I think that
we do expect him to be back. We expect him back and probably starting next year at one of the guard positions. But I agree with you. I think he's a guard, but maybe in a pinch, he's a tackle. I just think you probably try to plan for like a real tackle there.
Yeah, 100%. I would go after somebody who's a real tackle, and leave Bedford alone, basically. Let him rehab and to be a guard. There's a bunch of positions of need here. Matt alluded to it earlier. Tight end is obviously the position of need for me. But I don't really think I need to talk about that too much because it's obvious they need people at tight end. They needed one last year. We really saw Oregon's run attack really struggle when it was just Kenyon Sadiq, Patrick Herbert, and Roger Saliapaga. This is the perks of adding tight ends who are 6'6" and 250 pounds that could block. I think that's what I've been saying for years now on this podcast. But I really think it's offensive line. I think that this needs to be addressed immediately. This is a problem potentially because you're going to have Connerly, Harper, and a Johnny Cornelius gone at the end of the year. They're all, Connerly's probably going to go just because he's been, mocked in the first round. He could be a day one or, at the very latest, a day two prospect. And that's going to cost a lot of money if you're going to try to keep him on campus. It's hard to turn down first round money, and not a lot of kids do it, especially on a team where there are other kids you'd like to keep on campus. Cornelius gone. I think Marcus Harper is out of eligibility as well, if I'm not mistaken. So that's your starting left, right tackle, and your starting right or left guard, depending on whatever the construction of the situation is. Your starting left guard, Nishad Strother, gone. So that's 4 of your 5 offensive linemen, starting offensive linemen for a majority of the season that are now gone. And it's just Poncho, your center, which is the least valuable position on the offensive line.
Hey now.
So this is a problem. And for as well as Oregon has done recruiting wise, they haven't necessarily brought in like blue chip offensive line prospects in the last couple of recruiting cycles, other than Connerly in the 2022 class, I think it was. They brought in really talented players, but it hasn't necessarily been like one of these 5-star kids, one of these, top 40 players in the country. Jaquan McCrory was literally like the closest thing to that, and he's gone now, or he entered the transfer portal yesterday. It was. So I think it's a real problem that I'm sure will be very much addressed in the transfer portal, or Oregon's just going to have a lot of faith in guys that they're internally developing. I'm not sure I have that same faith. It's very similar to the defensive line last year. It's very nice for the defensive line this year when your 2 Band-Aids to the solution are, potential all-conference players in Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon. They just need to do that again. And that's pretty easy, obviously.
I do think they might be okay at guard, because I think Bedford and Iuli are you're pretty comfortable with that based upon what we've seen. But I agree at the time.
Probably, yeah.
And I agree with you guys. Like, the offensive line needs to get fixed. It is a problem, but I think if there's one roster, talent acquisition that Dan Lanning has proven to be truly elite at, and he's been really good at everything, really. But it's portal. Like, they do not miss on portal ads for the most part at any position. I think that's been really impressive, and why they're in this position now is on the field of being 12-0 and the number 1 team in the country, is because they have been able to maneuver the portal waters and find guys that, whether it's a starter or someone who shows up and has a very distinct, reserve role, they hit home runs on all of those kind of additions. So I would, it's an issue, like Jared pointed out, but I also have like full confidence it's going to get figured out. It would be a pretty big shock to the system for me if they don't have a pretty good offensive line next season. I did want to ask a question, because I don't think they're really going to hit it too hard. Very similar to maybe what they did this past year's D-line, because they lose a lot of guys again. Jordan Birch is going to be gone. Jamari Caldwell is going to be gone. Derek Harmon's probably going to be gone as a future draft pick. Keon Ware-Hudson's a guy that's played in a lot of games for Oregon and as a reserve, and he will have exhausted all his eligibility. And I think they're going to hit the portal for maybe 1 or maybe 2 guys, but I think it was pretty telling. They didn't load up on a bunch of D linemen this year in the recruiting class. They did it the year before and the year before that. I think this is one where they're going to be trusting kind of the development of the position group for the younger guys that are in the system, and then trying to find maybe 1 or 2 game changers.
I think that's exactly right. I think we've developed these guys. I noticed the same thing on the prep recruiting. Matthew Johnson's the only true defensive lineman in this class. and they didn't load up like they have in other years. But I think that's because the last couple of classes they absolutely loaded up, and we've seen, I'm not going to say Tione Gray or Terrence Green have played huge snap counts because that would be inaccurate, but we've seen them kind of be incorporated a little bit this season. And Amari Washington obviously is a returner who's going to be, I think, it's starter next year almost regardless. But I agree that you probably do want to go out there and find at least one high-end, big-time defensive tackle. And I think that's a position that, frankly, kind of presents itself more than you think in the portal based upon the last couple of years. I'm just thinking about like some of the highest-rated portal players the last couple of years, not only the ones that Oregon have added, but that other schools have added. It seems like there's usually some players out there. I know Bear Alexander. I don't know if you want to touch that player because he's been kind of a nightmare everywhere he's gone, but that's an NFL caliber, player you bring in. Maybe you figure you can get his kind of head, on straight, because that's been, I think, sort of the issue. But I think that's you add one. Maybe it's similar to this last year. You add one, maybe two, and then you hopefully are able to rely on the Greens, the Grays, the Washingtons, the Aiden Brelands, the Jericho Johnsons. I mean, there's a lot of really highly regarded young players there. And I think at some point you'll see those guys kind of break through and be kind of the core of this front.
The other thing is that, Tatum and Mateo are game wreckers.
Yeah.
They have guys there. Mateo has 10.5 sacks this season. Like when Oregon was bringing in Jordan Birch, they didn't have anybody else as an edge rusher where they absolutely needed a top tier guy at the edge. And if you have your edges figured out already with Tatum and Mateo and Amari Washington, who I think is a really, really, really good player, he's just stuck behind like two of the best defensive tackles in the conference. So if you pair up Amari Washington with another elite defensive tackle, whoever that may be, and have a similar impact to Derek Harmon, I don't think it'll be the same just because of how well Harmon has performed this year. But
sure,
I think your defensive line is set. I like the guys in the background, like Eric went through it, Gray and Jericho and Terrence Green. Ashton Porter, I think, is a really solid edge guy who could replace, back up Mateo or Tatum. Elijah Rushing, Aiden Breland. They've loaded up on dudes. They should have enough.
Your guy Jaden Moore,
edge rusher extraordinaire.
Yeah.
In the Rabbits package, I really like him. I mean, he's just a third down guy, but like Eric was saying about Toby Hastrup earlier, those are valuable players. If it's third and long and you have a guy who's just frankly faster than the dude in front of him, that's good. You like that. So I think defensive line will be shored up not pretty easily because everything's going to be difficult, but I think it's really just like get a guy who's a monster next to Amari Washington, and I think you're okay.
I was just going to say that because Mateo will continue to start, Tatum will continue to start, Washington slides in.
You're not worried about those guys.
And then you're finding, it might be a case where you're looking for Mateo maybe to move to Jordan Birch's spot, along the defensive line instead of being an outside edge type guy. And I don't know if that's the right move or not, but that could be something that happens because he did fill in for Birch when he was injured. But it's finding just a massive productive D lineman. And it's probably that's it because Terrence Green has played some this season. Ashton Porter has played some this season. And I guess maybe the wild card for this group is like Blake Purchase. What happens with Blake Purchase? And that could dictate what happens here because he's clearly redshirting. And maybe this is what Dan was talking about. You'll see some guys that have redshirted that will play in the game on Saturday and then beyond. He's played in 4 games. He's redshirted now. He played in every single game as a 2023 true freshman. 4-star guy, looked to be the part, and then this year clearly was behind Tatum and Mateo. Maybe he factors in a bigger role next season. So you guys are right. D-line's completely locked up. Any other parting thoughts for you?
I don't want to extend this too much. I think the one position, not the one, because they could definitely address corner as well. But I am curious about inside linebacker.
Oh, yeah, I was going to bring that up too. Just
not that it's like a massive need because I think we love Devin Jackson, but 3 of your 4 rotational backers are done, and Bryce and Jeff are going to be really hard to replace just because those guys are all conference caliber players as we saw this week. And then Justin's season probably isn't as great because of how good Bryce was, frankly. Because Bryce was just kind of an unexpected, incredible player, leads the team in tackles, I mean, PFF loves this guy, Jared. He's like the third or fourth best linebacker in the country, according to them. But losing those players, I'm just curious to see who steps up, because we know Devin will be there. But after that, you're looking at Jerry Mixon, who's kind of been a little bit lost in the shuffle this year, and then a bunch of true freshmen from last year's class that I think people are high on, but again, just didn't have an opportunity to show it this year.
Justin could apply. I mean, I don't know if he's going to, and I don't know if Oregon would want him to, but he has a medical redshirt he could try and get in 2022. He only played in 2 games. Played in the opener, got hurt, tried to come back a couple weeks later, and shut it down after that. Maybe
that's a good point. That's a good point, Matt. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, to your point, like, Bryce has just been so much better than Justin has. And at times this year, Justin has not been good at all. But maybe the full year of whatever injury he dealt with in the spring happens, and maybe they go down that path. That's something to ask Dan probably here in a couple of weeks when he's not focused on a championship game and signing day and all of that stuff. So
that'll be a couple of months, Matt, before we're getting him on that.
Well, I mean, I think we could sneak it in mid-December when there's that natural break, but we'll see. He's always in a tough mood sometimes.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Jared? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. I got nothing.
I just had one last thing. I'm sorry, guys. I just wanted. This was
46 minutes.
We're going. Okay.
Pick it up.
Okay. Okay. Here it is. Or the top-rated recruits in this prep class from Duncanville, Texas, Birmingham, Alabama, Tampa, Florida, Owings Mills, Maryland, Conroe, Texas, Cleveland, Ohio, Tampa, Florida. That's their top 8 guys. Those are all top 100 recruits, all from nowhere near Oregon's footprint. Just wanted to, I know we kind of talked about the geography earlier. That was a stat I wanted to just throw out there at some point, just because it speaks to, it's not just that they're getting players from other parts of the country, they're getting the best players from other parts of the country.
Yeah, they've turned into, as they like to call themselves, the national brand for sure now. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening to today's show. We'll be back Friday morning with our preview show to get you ready for Oregon Penn State from Indianapolis on Saturday night. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.